Welcome to our first of two webinar that ISPI, in cooperation with the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, is promoting. It's a Zoom event, and as you know, in Zoom event, time is tight. Time is always tight, but in online, we have to be short and be effective. So I will start completely skipping my opening remarks and giving immediately the floor to Deputy Minister Emanuela Del Re. I'm glad to do that, to skip my remarks and to give her the floor also, because if we are here today, it's because a year ago, in a conversation with the Deputy Minister, she nicely complained with me saying, how come ISPI is not involved and active on the Balkans? And she had a point. Since then, we hired a researcher at ISPI, and this is the first step in our deeper involvement in a region which is so close to us. Deputy Minister, you have the floor, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Paolo. I must say that I wish you had actually shared with us your thoughts, because your role is very deep and profound when you talk about foreign policy especially. Nevertheless, I understand the time restriction. I shall try to be quite let's say, concise. And of course, I'm very glad to participate in this event, because not only it is promoted by ISPI, but also is an expression of our collaboration, the collaboration of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with ISPI, which is producing new ideas. And I'm really, really quite satisfied by the fact that this is one of those products that will stay for a long time. I don't think it's just an episode. I want to say that the title is Why the Balkans Matter, but I would transform it into Because the Balkans Matter. For many years, of course, as you know, I have worked to diffuse the idea of the Balkans as a central element of European policy, and I'm actually happy to share ideas with you, also because I'm also glad to confirm that the Balkans remain a top strategic priority for Italy as a country. I can say that, of course, it goes without saying that the future of Western Balkans is in Europe, and we have been a supporter of it for a huge number of reasons that I don't want to enumerate, but obviously, that we have to go to historic ties, social ties, commercial ties, and other elements that obviously constitute a causal factor for us being so devoted and engaged in this important battle. Western Balkans still demand for full integration into the European Union, and to a certain extent, with the different nuances, obviously also to NATO. NATO is an important ambition, although European integration is absolutely paramount in this moment, because it opens the doors to many other opportunities. The Euro-Atlantic integration remains absolutely the mainstream to achieve the final stabilization of the region, to promote the solution of open issues, and to steer the transition towards full and effective democracies. Of course, there are some critical aspects, given that we all know the very recent steps that have been taken. One is definitely for the European Union, a critical aspect, the need to reaffirm the credibility of the European integration perspective, also taking into consideration the fact that we have other actors that are already stepping up with their presence in the region. It has been quite evident also during the ongoing emergency due to the spread of COVID-19. The European Union option must absolutely be revived and never given for granted if we want to keep the Western Balkans EU-oriented. In fact, while the European Union retains its popularity in the Western Balkans, it is not the only player, and this we know very well. Should the EU commitment in the region fade, this would risk strengthening the alternative actors and models present in the area. But I don't think that this is a question of competition with other actors. It is a question of strong conviction of the European Union of its role in the Western Balkans. So I think we should go away from that mentality of being in competition with other players, because they have been there for many years already, and they are established in the region, but with a different value. Maybe we must go more on the qualitative aspect rather than just the quantitative, or let's say the mere presence and strong goals of others. We also have to think very carefully at the moment on the issue of time, because it is another element that should not be underestimated. I think that the good news of the opening of accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia last March sent a clear and concrete signal of consistency and credibility towards the whole region. However, we all know that it was very late. Everything tells us that we must accelerate the integration for a number of reasons, including the ones I've just mentioned. The importance of the time factor is absolutely fundamental. It must not be underestimated. I think that the recent steps in particular will open a new phase for the integration of the Western Balkans in the European Union, with the swift approval of the negotiating framework with Tirana and Skopje, and the opening of new negotiating chapters with Serbia and Montenegro. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo should move forward on the European path too. This is my view, but I think it is also the view of Italy, but I think we must all together promote it very strongly. Both sides, the European Union and the Western Balkan countries, must act with consistency and credibility. While reform processes in the region must continue unabated, the European Union must stand ready to encourage and reward these efforts by advancing the negotiations. This is crucial also for the governments of the Western Balkan countries, who need to give an answer to their internal public opinions, show that their efforts are rewarded. I think that we should also take this into consideration. I cannot go too much into details, of course, given the time restrictions, but I want to say that having followed the evolution of the integration process closely since the 1990 actually, that the lesson we have learned, and the lessons we are still learning actually from all this process that we have witnessed, is that not only the final goal is important, but the process to reach it is even more significant for all the effects that it implies. What I mean is that, for instance, the European Union member states have gone through a number of adjustments, and obviously, at political, economic, social, and cultural level over the years of membership, also because of their membership. So we have changed with the process, not necessarily because we have reached the goal, we are stuck in a particular situation. It's a continuous evolution, very dynamic. The same has happened in the Western Balkans with all the conditionalities, the systematization of the strategy to be put in place in all sectors. This process of rationalization has proved to be beneficial for both the European Union and the Western Balkans. But it is time to show clearly the results and to prove that this methodology works. This is an important reflection also in the current crisis. We cannot avoid talking about the crisis, unfortunately, COVID-19, because it is a matter that is of global interest. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has become a fundamental indicator also in foreign policy, because it has changed the scenario, the width of our vision. Cooperation between the states has become a common denominator in all our choices. In this respect, I really want to thank once again the Western Balkan partners who were ready to provide help to Italy, for instance, in the spirit of a true European solidarity. I think that this should be really enhanced at the maximum. I think also that this pandemic has provided a testbed for the efficacy and concreteness of the results of the EU integration process that is now explicitated in the cooperation between the European Union and the Western Balkans. I am glad to report that thanks to the cooperation between Italy and the Regional Cooperation Council, which is a regional cooperation organization operating in Southeastern Europe, Italian operational protocols for treatment of COVID-19 patients are now available in all Western Balkans' 6 languages. Let's explore the European Union response to the challenges of COVID-19 in the Balkan region. We must say that this was a test bed, and the response was that we have had a clear and strong response. A financial package already announced by the European Commission to benefit the Western Balkan region will provide concrete relief for the economy of these countries. I was reading the figures today, which are appalling, and I think that this, the fact that we are aware of being able to intervene is very important, and of the fact that the European Union itself, with all its divisions inside, you know, towards the Western Balkans, in fact, are responding as a unified body. Again, we are not in competition with third actors who are present in some cases in the Balkans since a long time, and others who are stepping up their presence in the area. However, of course, there is no doubt that the presence of the so-called masked diplomacy obliges us to concentrate our efforts on our strong points. It is a matter of laying the basis for the relationship that we shall entertain with the Western Balkans from now on, above all at qualitative level. What can we offer to the Western Balkans? First of all, a credible European integration perspective, able to deliver its promises. We know that credibility and trust are fundamental in foreign relations as well as within societies, the societies of the Western Balkans themselves. Number two, I would say that we can offer concrete economic and financial aids and the sharing of sanitary best practices related to, in particular, COVID-19, but also in other sectors, to provide expertise and technical skills to the region. These words, expertise, technical skills, offer a synthesis of the most significant qualitative characteristics of the European Union. The European Union and the Balkans both are rule of law-based democracies centered on transparency and respect for individual rights, including the right to privacy. This is not a negligible aspect in times of coronavirus as well. So the spread of COVID-19 through the Western Balkans region raises new issues and concerns in terms of destabilization of political context. For instance, in Kosovo, where the pandemic undoubtedly played a role in the occurred government crisis. But the COVID-19 also brought into in place new opportunities. For example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the recent adoption of a roadmap for implementing the 14 key priorities set by the European Commission last year might contribute to relaunching a shared and the EU-oriented reform process in the upcoming years. In almost all the Western Balkans countries, political parties were able to set aside their disputes and work together to manage emergency. We can, however, expect the internal political confrontation to resume soon and become even more animated due to the adverse economic situation ahead of us. We must be ready for this and work for this together. It is crucial that we increase efforts and initiatives also at bilateral level, aimed at fostering political dialogue and at keeping such dialogue within the democratic dynamic, which is a key element to avoid undesirable and untimely halt in Western Balkans European integration process. We must not give others the opportunity, especially within the European Union, to say that everything that has been done so far was vain or not concrete, and then you know that we should rethink the integration of the Western Balkans. So in conclusion, I can say that we cannot risk that the Balkans and the European Union confine each other in the realm of myth, whether positive or negative, with the obvious consequence of living on ideals. We, the European Union and the Balkans, must take advantage of the fact that the pandemic created an hyper-realistic life, because this offers us the opportunity to transform it into hyper-concrete actions to move forward in the integration process. The time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Emanuela. And also thank you for the positive view in your last comment, which is unusual in these days of dramatic scenarios made by everybody. So it helps, and I will immediately turn your comment to one of our panelists. We have a wonderful and competent panel of 5 speakers, which I will introduce one by one soon, and the great pleasure to have at the end of the panel the conclusion by Sam Fabrizi, which is the head of the European delegation in Serbia. Thank you for being with us. I will start immediately with Milena Lazarevic, who is director of the European Policy Center in Serbia. With Milena, we were together in another panel yesterday, so we changed topic today. Milena, let me take two points that the Deputy Minister made. One, she was in several occasions using the word consistency, credibility, credible, trust. So my first question to you is, could you give us an assessment on how Europe is perceived as a consistent and credible partner now? And the second, I would ask you, would you agree with the Deputy Minister that at the end, coronavirus could be, in our topic, today's topic, more an opportunity than a disaster as it is in many others? Please, Milena.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you very much. Really, I'm really honored and grateful to have been invited to participate to this discussion. Very timely indeed. To your first question, I think that we have to start from how we define credibility. And if we define credibility about supporting and let's say advancing the long-term interest of a country and the society, I think that the EU is not, there is no question whether the EU is still a credible partner. The EU is the only credible partner to the Balkans. Other actors, non-EU actors, are much more eager and likely to support the short-term political interests and maneuvers of the political leaderships in the region. And in that sense, I could never even think about them as credible actors and credible partners to my country or the rest of the region. Of course, credibility is not something that is a given. It is not something that has not been questioned and tested in the past period. And I have to say that credibility, when we speak about it, it has to go both ways. It's a two-way street. So if we expect to have it from the EU, we also have to be able, and our governments need to be able to reciprocate and to show credibility on their side. Of course, in the moments when the progress that was visible in some countries in the region, and I'm sure that Simonida will later speak about the example of North Macedonia, which is now, let's say, the bright example, I would say, in the Balkans. When that kind of progress and sacrifice is not rewarded, then of course credibility is questioned. And I can say that this is one aspect of credibility, of the test of the credibility, which has been fixed to a large extent and even rather quickly, surprisingly quickly. But then there are other aspects of credibility which have not been fixed yet. And this is something that my think tank, but also as part of our regional Think for Europe network, the group of 6 think tanks, where Simonida's European Policy Institute also belongs. We have been advocating for this for a long time. When EU member states, but also EU institutions leaders do not clearly sanction and show the willingness to sanction either in their discourse or in the actual actions, the lack of progress or even backsliding in the reforms in the region, when this is not sanctioned, then this also puts to the test the credibility of the European Union and the European Union's approach. And we have been advocating for a long time the necessity for the political leadership of the EU member states and the EU institutions when they visit our countries to be able to decouple the messages of support to our countries and our nations belonging to the EU and the fact that we are seen eventually as part of the European Union and that there is a real perspective of advancing in the process and joining the European Union. That is one set of the messages, but that then these messages should not be mixed up with messages supporting directly the political leadership of the countries, especially in situations and in periods when their democratic actions are questioned and severely questioned and strongly questioned, not only by the domestic civil society, but as we can see now, for example, in the case of Serbia, also by international rankings and international organizations. We can go more into detail on that, but I think that this is an important point to make. I think that it is extremely important to make sure that lack of progress and backsliding also is received with proper responses. And I do not agree that hurrying up with opening remaining accession negotiation chapters with Serbia is a good way to go in the period when the country is clearly, when the country's government, when the country's leadership is clearly not making progress. I think we need to make a stop, and we need to make a clear message that Serbia, the Serbian leadership needs to restore trust of the European Union in terms of the reforms that it is implementing, but at the same time to announce that there is a perspective, a possibility to speed up the process once this progress is shown. To your second question, I would say that this crisis has been sort of a test. At least in the case of Serbia, it has really proven to be a test. And we have seen that the Serbian leadership, to an extent, has at least initially failed the test by declaring in a very important national address that EU solidarity is a myth and a dream, and that we can only count on China. What worries me as a researcher and as an expert in my country is that, and we also spoke about that in other events in the previous days, that the discourse, the political discourse about the European Union in Serbia has become very dry and very emotionless, whereas the discourse related to China and Russia has become very emotional, and it is very dangerous because that can, in the long term, further deteriorate and undermine the popular support and the popular support to the European Union, which eventually can translate in less of a political support for Serbia's EU accession. So I think that there is a dangerous trend here, and that everyone should be aware of that trend. Some fixing of the damage has been done already by the Serbian leadership, but I can say with certainty that it was too little too late. And I will stop here, and I hope we can continue in the discussion.
Thank you, Milena. And you mentioned Macedonia, North Macedonia, and I have the pleasure now to give the floor to Simonida Kaczarska. Is that correct?
Kaczarska.
Yes, thank you. Simonida, Macedonia even changed its name to Move Fast. As the delay, this was something Milena mentioned before, as the delay question credibility, or is over?
Thank you for the question, Paolo, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure, and we're really honored to have this panel amidst the difficult times that we are all encountering, but especially Italy. I think we would have all loved to be in Milan, but we are really glad that this is actually, the panel is actually taking place in the, and I think that going back to your previous question, I think that it shows partnership and credibility on the side of, on your side to the region. Now, what is now North Macedonia, as you rightly said, changed its name. You used the term to move fast. I would take a step back to say that it changed its name to move, because it was in a deadlock. It changed its name to be able to continue with a process. In my view, and I think that we have to be, this is a panel about the Western Balkans, we tend to look at the region from afar as a single group, but I think that we all have our idiosyncrasies, and Macedonia's specificities relate to the fact that it's been in a deadlock for a very long time. It's the first country that signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement back in 2001. And sometimes we feel banal when we talk about the fact that the Stabilization and Association Agreement was signed almost 20 years ago. It will be next year. But the European orientation has been a fact ever since, and has been the primary driving mode of the Macedonian society, which led to getting the candidate status in 2005, and later on a deadlock of the accession negotiations since 2009. Now we hear North Macedonia being mentioned as a good example, as the example that could possibly reverse the credibility of the Union in the region, because it made very difficult concessions, but we also had a very difficult non-decision in October, which was now followed by a decision of the Council to start the accession negotiations in March. But unfortunately, this decision was largely overshadowed by the COVID crisis. It is a step forward in any case. I mean, we can't turn a blind eye that even in also going back to where I started, in these difficult circumstances, the member states of the Union managed to reach a decision on starting the accession negotiations, a much awaited one. But we also have to keep in mind that the COVID-19 has created a very crisis, has created very specific circumstances in which we are at the moment. Had the decision happened out before the crisis, then the impact on the EU's credibility would have been, in any case, restoring the credibility would have been stronger. At this point, it is also conditioned by the response that the country, because we are now focusing on North Macedonia specifically, that the country will get from the European Union, also in terms of the support that the country will get from the European Union in managing the COVID crisis. And I think that also the national response to the EU support and to the support from many other countries that it's been getting also single out a second specificity of North Macedonia. And this is the fact that it's at least its current government, and and also we've not heard this question by the opposition, most of this support is expected from the EU, and the EU is recognized as the primary partner in this respect, providing support to North Macedonia. So in this case, although the EU was maybe perceived to be acting late, a bit later than hoped for, the response has been rather positive. So we can see that some of the puzzles of the credibility, if we would like to go back to the first piece being the decision to start the accession negotiations, and the second being the support during the COVID crisis, I think we can see that this is a positive trend. However, I think that one large piece that is missing, possibly the third one, if we are talking about one puzzle, is the actual start of the accession negotiations, because as we know, the decision in March did not have a date attached to it. We are awaiting for the negotiating framework to be prepared by the European Commission. And as I see, we have 100 attendees. That's why not everyone is always familiar with the specificities. We are awaiting for this negotiating framework to come in June. Possibly, it was announced by the Commission. It will have to be accepted by all EU member states. And at this point, we have further objections by Bulgaria as to some of the aspects that need to be included in the negotiating framework in terms of the contestation of the language of the country and some part of historical matters. So in the view of this last third piece of the puzzle, we don't see that it is still there. But I think that in terms of restoring the credibility and responding to the name change, it will be a big symbolic step for the public, also for the political elite that has been supporting the pro-European narrative in the country, to have an actual first pre-accession conference, first intergovernmental conference, and to have a symbolic start of the EU accession negotiations. This will be important for the population, but in the bigger picture, and if we take a step back, it will be a confirmation that the process of the European integration is, the process is still valid, that it is ongoing, but also that we go back to the core of the purpose of enlargement, which is to help a country transform and democratize.
Thank you, Simonda. I forgot to ask Milena and you, and so I will go back also to Milena, and I will ask also the other panelists. 30 seconds in all intervention on how the situation is concerning coronavirus. health situation and in which status you are in right now, lockdown, phase 2 or whatever. Let's start from Milena, 30 seconds, but I think it's important we get a clue and a picture of our friends and neighboring countries. Milena?
Very briefly, Serbia finally came out of the state of emergency for over a week now. The measures have largely been abolished, and now we only have recommendations. The public transportation is open, bars and restaurants are open, hairdressers and all the other related shops and salons are also open. There has been some worries that perhaps this relaxation has happened too swiftly, too abruptly. But it seems that at least in the public transportation in the parks, people are largely still staying cautious, and so far the numbers have not gone up.
Thank you. We had no doubt on hairdresser open, but thanks for confirming. Simonida, 30 seconds on North Macedonia.
Yes, North Macedonia started the lockdown early mid-March. We have already been in a lockdown for 2 months. And we have heard today from our Minister of Health that they will ask for an extension of the emergency situation in which the country is, although they are starting a gradual easing of the measures as of Monday. The schools will not open until the end of this academic year. That has been decided. Kindergartens will only possibly resume, but they are acting very cautious as to the relaxation of some of the measures. The government has been largely supported by the population, with more than 80% of the public approving of the measures and approving the actions of the Minister of Health so far.
Thank you. Before we move to our third panelist, I'm glad to inform you that summing up our website, the Zoom participant and Facebook, we have more than 300 people attending the conference, which is extremely good. And this is one of the good silver lining of this Zoom generation we are all experiencing online. I'm glad now to give the floor to Albert Rakipi, chairman of the Albanian Institute for International Studies. Albania is together with North Macedonia into the same process, in the same step. Simonida was very nice in presenting all the specificity of the North Macedonian case. Can we ask you to do the same with Albania after 30 seconds on the coronavirus situation? Please.
Well, thank you very much, Paolo. First of all, I'm really grateful and for inviting me to join this debate. Well, regarding the coronavirus, we formally still have the state of emergency, but the situation is a bit different. We hope that next week the government will remove a number of restrictions. And well, it's different from the cities like Tirana, for example, and Durrës. There are more rules, to follow, procedures, restrictions. Well, there are other cities in the south that the so-called green area that there are few cases of coronavirus. But as I said, next week, probably on Monday or Tuesday, the government promised to remove a number of measures to open coffee shops and restaurants. But again, still we are in quasi lockdown for the rest of the month, I think. And however, I would say that the case in Albania was not very aggressive. We have like 800 cases. And the government and other state agencies are working to prevent it, to work together to avoid worsening bad things for the country. but still we have formally we have a state of emergency and restrictions for public transportation and of course other like coffee shops and the restaurants and or people working, and the situation is much better now.
Thank you very much for updating. We can now move to the topic of our dialogue.
Well, yeah, first of all, I think that it's important the initiative taken by ISPI to organize debate on the future of region in Western Balkans from the EU integration, EU enlargement. And also I would like to say that also it's important that Italy is trying to take the lead. We have seen Italy as a key country within the EU that always consistently supported European integration, EU enlargement in the Balkans. And we are, of course, we are grateful to the Italian government for taking such position, especially in the last 2 or 3 years that we have seen that Italy is trying to have a strong voice in the EU when it comes to the enlargement process in the Western Balkans. Well, when it comes to Albania and the differences with Macedonia, I think it was, first of all, it was a very good decision and it was welcomed, European Council decision to finally open negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. It took us like 6 years, that is a relatively long time actually, to finally give a green light because, well, to go to the formal opening of negotiations, I think we need more time. But before commenting on the differences and the state of affairs in Albania regarding European integration, I will briefly bring to you 2 points. Number one, for Albania and for a number of other countries in the Western Balkans, European integration has been really important. It's about the state building. And the European perspective has been the driving force of the state building, especially for us. Because the rest of the Balkans belongs to the former, the federal, the Yugoslav Federation was a different country from the economic point of view, market, was in one way or another was part of the, the West and East with an online movement, open country to a certain extent, while Albania was very isolated, as you know, and I'm not going to bring you details, you know the story. So the important thing is that with EU integration, with EU perspective, and of course EU investment, EU money, we started to change and to rebuild the state in this country. Let me bring you the case of 1997, for example. With EU money, funds in Albania, after the crisis of 1997, we built a prison, and there is no state without prison. But also the EU was contributing during the last 20, 25 years, building courts, building infrastructures, which are exactly the duties for a state, actually. But it's a state, really state building. The second issue is about the support for European integration, which is, again, exceptional in this country and not used by the leadership, the political leadership, the current one or the previous one. So there is no other country in the Western Balkans, or like in Macedonia, for example, or in other countries who already are members of EU, starting from the Big Bang in 2004, in 2007, having such popular support for European integration is over 90%. So it tells something. Not necessarily that people doesn't know what exactly means the European integration, but the people want to see the country to progress, to change the country, to make a democratic society, functional state. This is very, very important. Sometimes I call it totalitarian support, because 90%, 95% is more than enough. But this is one side. And on the other side, we have seen that unfortunately, the political parties in the government, in power, or in the opposition they failed for a relatively long time to work together, to build consensus for a number of things in order to accelerate the progress of European integration. I mean, it's it's a political culture. It's a zero-sum game. It's based on conflict, disagreements for very important things for the country. And we have to see that with the latest decision of European Council, whether the country leadership, political leadership, will start to work together for very important things. Compared to North Macedonia, for example, we have a package. I mean, the decision of European Council came together with a package of conditions, like 15 conditions, which are essential for the state functionality. They are not related to necessarily to European integration. For example, otherwise is going back to the basics, because they are related. For example, we hope to, if we see the long list of conditions, the first one is related to the electoral reform, implementing the electoral reform, elections. But elections are not about EU integration. Elections are the way to, to legitimate, to bring in power, or to give legitimacy to the political parties competing for the government. So there are very essential things, and they are related to, they are basic things for the state functionality. So if we see there are no conditions for North Macedonia, there is a package for us, important things, and we have to do to fulfill these conditions, not for Brussels, not for Rome, not for Berlin, but we have to do it for ourselves. Also, if we keep in mind that, for example, Serbia, it took Serbia 1 year, if I'm not mistaken, to open officially the negotiations, then for us it will be more difficult because we have to fulfill a number of important things, as I said, which are related to the power struggle within the country. If they will be able, the political parties, leadership, to come together to build consensus for the future of the country, will be easy, of course, in 1 year or so.
I have to ask you to conclude in a second, because
one more thing. When the last thing is related to the credibility, the trust. EU is seen here as we have more trust in the EU, than our own government, prime minister or the president or other politicians. But one more thing I would like to bring to your attention is that the European Commission, for the last 3 years, they recommended, unconditionally recommended, to open negotiations with Albania. And now the latest decision taken by European Council, as I said, they put a number of conditions which are really essential, really very important. And I brought this point that the credibility of European Commission, of the European, other structures of European Union are important, to build together the way, the road towards preparing Albania or other countries for European integration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Albert. I'm really sorry having to signal or interrupt the panelists, but we want to get a dialogue with participants, and so take some questions and get back to you. I would like to move to Plator Avdiu, who is a researcher at the Kosovo Center of Security Study, because your country has a specificity in this moment. All over the world, approximately almost all over the world, during the pandemic and the crisis, support for government and leader is increasing, with a few exceptions. In your country, the government fell down. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Magri, for the question and for the invitation on the panel. You are right, as the recent developments show in Kosovo. Unfortunately, beyond the COVID-19 crisis, we had to deal, let's say, with very extreme occurrences in the politics, which among others included also the toppling of the government by one of the coalition partner of the current government, acting in conjunction with the opposition parties. In fact, COVID-19 and also the developments related to the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia brought such an action, where the new government, which was elected in February of this year, and it had maybe more than 50 days of being in such position. Then we had the no motion confidence vote within the assembly. Of course, there were some internal developments on this. First of all, there was a disagreement expressed between president and the current caretaker prime minister of Kosovo on how we should deal with the handling the situation on COVID. For example, the president was constantly requiring to have this extraordinary declared emergency, and the government was expressed against, and this was one of the first fractions on this, and also the let's say developments within the dialogue, which also brought to polarize the situation internally, but also externally, I would say, because we are having maybe for the first time in those negotiation and dialogue processes when there is no transatlantic unity between US and European Union, I would say, given the new energy that US has given to the dialogue, and on the other hand, the reluctance, how to say, of specific EU member states and EU itself in this process. We can also say that there is somehow some external developments which also brought to those actions in Kosovo. As for example, President Thaci was let's say using this kind of energy brought by US in order to find a fast deal between Kosovo and Serbia. Of course, those developments has produced a crisis, political crisis right now, as we have to wait until the end of this month whether we are having a new government or whether we are going to new elections, as long as the constitutional court in Kosovo is going to rule on this case. Apart from these developments, it is very disappointing what happened just last week within the European Union, which didn't bring any new dynamic, how to say, on the relations of Kosovo with the EU, but also on the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, because through the Zagreb summit and the declaration that it was issued after the summit, the message is very vague. It's very ambiguity, and there is no reference, how to say, on the enlargement process, on integration process. There are some generalized statements with regard to the so-called European perspective. And what Kosovo was expecting in this case was also to have the green light for the visa liberalization process, which didn't happen, and this somehow creates some furious sensitivities in terms of dynamics by the side of European Union, because we can see that the EU is much more in favor of some gradual steps than undertaking some concrete and some tangible actions towards Kosovo. And if EU would be more proactive, then we would have maybe much more what I would call this kind of transatlantic unity. But it seems that things for now are quite chaotic, having in mind situation in Kosovo, but also in Serbia, which is about to have new elections, and we have this kind of energy brought by the US, which in fact we don't know what will be like end product of this, as long as there is the impression that US is wanting to have a deal very fast, but we don't know what is going to be the content of the deal. And what is important to note is also that the US used somehow the process led by Federica Mogherini, the previous EU representative on foreign policy, which in fact was behaving in a very awkward way when we have this kind of controversial discussions on land swap between Kosovo and Serbia, and there is still some ongoing statements made just recently also by Mr. Borrell on this, who in fact didn't deny at least this discussion. So we are in this situation right now, and trying to recap about the COVID situation in Kosovo. Since the beginning of May, the Kosovo government has relaxed somehow the rigid measures that were in place in Kosovo, but still, when it comes to the freedom of movement, people have the right to move only 3 hours per day, and some shops have been reopened, but not all of them, including here, for example, shopping centers which do not work. Some private bodies as well. They maybe they are working, but they need some special permissions. Of course, schools are not working, and the bars and restaurants are not working as well.
Thank you, Plato. Sorry for interrupting. Thank you very much. I will now move to the last panelist before the intervention of the ambassador of the European delegate in head of delegation in Serbia. But before, I would like to remind everybody attending this virtual meeting, that it is possible to send questions. You can do commenting the streaming direct on Facebook or in Zoom, utilizing the chat which is available on your screen, and then I will report your question to the panelists. Dimitar Bekev is senior researcher at the Atlantic Council. Dimitar, the title of our meeting is the Balkan, the European Union, and the others. And Deputy Minister De Re stressed that the others are not competitor, but they are present, they are active in the region. I'm referring to, and we have referred to, Russia, China, and Turkey. Can you, in a few minutes, highlight their geostrategic and geopolitical interests in the region?
Thank you, Paolo, and thanks for inviting me to this discussion and for being able to contribute to the report. Everyone listening to the discussion, just go back to the ISPI website and download. It's a great piece of research. The Balkans, as we now see with the COVID crisis, has been kind of targeted by various external actors. I think Russia, China, and Turkey are fundamentally different. So Russia is different from Turkey, Turkey is different from China, and China is obviously different from Russia. The only common denominator is that they're not the West. Russia has been involved in the region since the 90s, but has gone through various stages. I wrote a book about the subject. In the 90s, it was mostly about the wars in Yugoslavia, and we shouldn't forget that Russia had its military on the ground in Kosovo and before that in Bosnia. Later on, in the 2000s, it was Russia as an energy power. In other words, it was much more constructive in terms of engagement, and many of those projects, South Stream first and foremost, and now Turk Stream 2 as a sequel, were implemented together with big Western European companies, including from Italy. The last stage of Russia's involvement, which is more recent, comes after the annexation of Crimea. And over the past 7 years or almost, Moscow has been a spoiler. There is no positive agenda. The point is to make life difficult for the US, but also for the EU, in order to extract leverage and try to deploy it in the geopolitical bargain. In other words, if the West is interfering, and that's the Russian point of view, in Russia's near abroad, Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, Russia can do the same in the Western Balkans, where you have lots of opportunities. And likewise, then bring it to the table. That's very shortly what Russia is after. It's not a long-term policy, as we've discussed in the discussion. Now, moving to Turkey. Turkey is a different case because, first of all, unlike Russia and China, it's a Balkan country. It's not just a Balkan country. It belongs to the Middle East and to the Caucasus as well, but it has strong connections to the region. For instance, when President Erdogan goes to Novi Pazar in Serbia, and he's greeted by the locals, many of those people have their family in Turkey, do business, trade, and so on and so forth. A large chunk of the population in Turkey comes from the Balkans as well. So Turkey is embedded into the region, and that makes it different from the other two. Secondly, Turkey, despite the crisis in relations with the West, remains part of NATO and has been supportive of NATO enlargement. And likewise, Turkey is part of the EU Customs Union. It's not for nothing that the big trading partners for Turkey in Southeast Europe are not the Western Balkans, but the EU member states, Romania first and foremost, for the simple reason, big markets and also EU membership, and Turkey is part of these Western sphere. But likewise, Turkey has its own policy. It's not the Western policy. It tries to leverage connections. And what is also interesting in the Turkish case is that the Balkans is part also of the Turkish domestic scene. Many of you remember 2018 when Erdogan had the big pre-election rally in Sarajevo, because he was denied the opportunity to rally Turks in Germany, in the Netherlands, and the Balkans was a useful staging ground for him to garner support at home and bring Turks from the diaspora from all over Europe. So it's a different dynamic, very, very briefly. But the message is that Turkey is not a spoiler. It can be a spoiler, but sometimes it's cooperating the West. Other times it's running parallel. Now, China is the newcomer. And as we have seen in the COVID crisis, it's very visible because of the aid it dispatched. I guess everyone, or nearly everyone following this discussion, has seen the billboards or the reports about the billboards in Belgrade. Thank you, Brother Xi, they were saying, paid by a pro-government tabloid. China has lots to offer. I mean, it has the money in terms of soft loans. It doesn't take up political issues. For instance, on Kosovo, China is against independence, but is not actively pushing back, unlike Russia. And therefore, it can talk to pretty much everyone and bringing the money to the table. Secondly, the Chinese are welcome because they give the region recognition. Leaders are not put in a ghetto, but they are bundled together with the rest of Central and Eastern Europe, EU member states as well. So this gives symbolic recognition in addition to promising money. And China has a long-term policy, obviously, to have access to the European markets and the Western Balkans and Southeast Europe as a whole, including Greece, which now joined the 17 plus 1, are part of this corridor for Chinese exports to the core European markets. Now, this is very briefly the policy, and we can come back to it in the questions and answers session, although I suspect we don't have that much time. But what I want to say by way of closing this opening round is that what people miss is that external actors' involvement in the Balkans is a two-way street, the way the EU is a two-way street. They're here because of the countries, the governments, and the leaders wanting them to be here for a variety of reasons, because they promise economic benefits in different kind of less than transparent schemes involving local businesses and pro-government support networks. And also they give political leverage to governments when they deal internally with their political opponents, but also in terms of regional competition. That is to say that the Balkans are not just a passive recipient of policies. They're not stuck between the EU and the non-Western actors, but also they are proactively playing those cards. I think that's very visible in the case of Serbia, but I think it also applies to the rest. Which also goes to show that if the EU is so much distant, which is likely to be the case in this decade, we'll see more of those players, China, Russia, and the EU, and certainly Turkey. And the way for the EU to tackle external actors, and that's the last thing I'm going to say, is not to focus only on their actions, but also to think about the enabling conditions, why they are in the region, why the corruption is so embedded, and why the media is so vulnerable to external influence, and why leaders have a free hand to balance and play off the West against the East. And the reforms of the domestic institutions and policies are essential if the EU wants to build resilience.
Thank you, Dimitar. Thank you very much. I'm sorry again to rush everybody. You have to present three positions of three big countries in 5 minutes. You ended up saying if the European Union is distant, is far away, and something will happen. But the European Union is not far away, it's here, because we have the great pleasure of having Sam Fabrizi, head of the European delegation in Serbia, to be with us, and you have the floor now, Sam.
Thank you, Professor, and good afternoon to all of you. It certainly is a pleasure to contribute to this useful discussion, and good afternoon to all the people and colleagues on the audience. Well, I would say try to respond briefly, telegraphically, to the three questions that you have raised and others colleagues have responded. Is the EU credible? Is others more credible than us? Is the COVID-19 making life more complicated? On the first one, I would say yes. On the second, no. And on the third, yes as well. Yes on the first, why? So I would say that the credibility of the EU in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans, cannot be put, can be put under scrutiny, but certainly cannot be put in doubt. Let's say if we remove the element of COVID and we limit to an analysis outside the COVID, I would say in this von Leiden commission in 6 months, and we had a number of positive and important steps. New methodology in January, opening of the negotiation with North Macedonia and Albania in March, 3.3 billion euro for the COVID response, and Zagreb summit last week, and we hope in June the adoption of the mandate for North Macedonia, Albania, and later on in the year, the economic recovery program for the Western Balkan region. So in that sense, the credibility for us is on the plate, on the table. And as also some of the predecessors said, credibility should be is a two-way street. In the sense it's, as also the Deputy Minister said, is a question of reforms, incentive, and reward. And I think on our side, we are quite focused on having reforms that make sense, that goes in the direction of the EU journey. So in that sense, to sum up at this point, we are committed. We see commitment in the region. We need to progress on this path, and the COVID-19 is an additional element. I shouldn't be considered as an element to changing the overall picture. The second question is, others players in the region credible, more credible? I would say, frankly, no, for different reasons. But rather than saying why they are not credible as the EU, of course, I'd like to say why the EU is credible. In all of the Western Balkans 6, we are offering what no one else offers. At least of 4 of the 6 players, we are offering membership, which is well beyond any possible foreign policy relation. We go for family. So it's something that nobody offer and nobody could offer. We are only one. And of course, this is a political proposition that put, by definition, the EU in the forefront compared to anybody. But even though we have to look also at other elements, the EU is the first donor, the first trade partner, the first investor in the Western Balkans. It's the numbers were there. It's no emotion, it's numbers. 70% of the FDI, 70% of trade, and by far, we are the largest donor. I think we are the combination of the 9 donors after the EU. So in that sense, there's no comparison there. The certainly is true that other players are present. Past has been traditional, also for geographical proximity. Others are new one, like China, who have a global outreach. But our line is, as I said, is not you join the EU against someone or against something. You join the EU because of the EU. As long as you share values, interest, and commitment, you are welcome into the family. And this is the commitment, the credibility of the commitment we want to see on the Western Balkans 6, which goes hand in hand with the credibility that we have put on the table. The third element, the last one, COVID make life complicated. It's true to make it complicated, but certainly I would say that no other region has received the same attention of the Western Balkan compared to from the EU point of view. I can witness from Serbia, state of emergency has been declared on March 16. On 20 of March, I signed the first donation for 7.9 million euro. And from there, we have been working hand in hand with all the partners and the Serbian institution every single day. It's true also the COVID has had a positive element, which has been put the Western Balkan in the system of solidarity mechanisms that the EU usually had for its own members. Solidarity Fund, the Civil Protection Fund, joint procurement for medicine agreement, Green Lane, all the measures that the EU has put in place has been enlarged to member states as they were member states. So I think in that sense, the COVID has gave us an opportunity. Of course, they're down risk. Economy is the first one. We have to, this is a medical and a health crisis. We risk to become an economic crisis. That is the sense of the package of 3.3 billion euro put on the table by the Commission last week. And this is why in October we are running an important economic recovery plan, which will be linked to our multi-financial program. So the message is the EU recovery will be the recovery of the Western Balkans. I will stop here, Professor, ready to pick up question and comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have already a few questions, and I will start. Quick question, quick reply. We have 10, 12 minutes, and I would like at the end to have Deputy Minister De Re to say the final comment to conclude. The first question is for Milena, and the question is, we always focus on what the European Union will bring to the countries of the Balkans, but what can their integration bring to the European Union? Then I have a question for Simonida, is will the language issue with Bulgaria be another step back in the process? And a question for Dimitar, what about the US role in the region? And then one question for Ambassador Sam Fabrizi. Has Brexit negatively influenced the integration process? So these are the first questions I received so far. Can we start, Milena?
Yes,
very like imagine you are on TV.
I will try. I cannot not start by the most obvious response, and that is securing peace and securing stability in Europe. This is what definitely integrating Balkans can bring to the EU. Unfortunately, stability, the argument of stability has been somehow turned into something negative, because at times stability has been prioritized and was perceived as being prioritized over democracy, which definitely I'm not advocating for. But the fact is that integrated Western Balkans in the EU can ensure long-term stability and peace in the European continent. Of course, in terms of economic cooperation, EU is a much bigger player for the Western Balkans than the Balkans for the EU. But in any case, even in economic terms, I don't think that it would be in the EU's interest to have a lagging and economically backsliding region at its door. So bringing in the Balkans into the European Union and fully into the European Union's single market can definitely ensure that the region starts to catch up more quickly with the rest of the Union and close gradually the development gap.
Thank you very much, Milena. Let me move to Simonida.
Thank you. This is precise, the language issue and the overall position that has been statement from the Bulgarian government that has accompanied the decision in March is the one thing that I mentioned as possibly could lead to a delay in the acceptance of the negotiating framework for the country. The EU accession is a narrative of compromises, but I think that it will be very difficult for the political elite in the country to make a compromise on this specific issue, because Macedonian as the language is also linked to the Presta agreement, which the country signed with Greece in terms of renaming to North Macedonia. So reconciling the two positions will be very difficult. And at the end of the day, it will depend on how persistent will the Bulgarian government be to push on these issues, and how much primacy will they give to this as their key objective for the next period, because I think they will have to fight a lot.
Thank you. Dimitar, the question on the US interest or role in the region, very telegraphic, please. Sorry.
Well, the region is not a priority for the US. It will be the EU doing the heavy lifting. The US has a very short attention span, and it's a pre-election year. Having said that, the Trump administration really needs a deal, whatever the content of the deal. So there might be the old push in Kosovo, but I don't see the US being such an overwhelmingly important player. I hope there will be a common position between the EU and the US, because that's how it works, if it works at all.
And that brings me to a question which came for Adju on the same topic. Would you agree on what Dimitar just said? Could we have a push on an agreement with Serbia?
Yeah, in fact, I completely agree with Dimitar. As history shows, always in those last 50, 60 years, but especially from the wars that happened in the Balkans in the 90s, if there is a will to cooperate between the US and the EU, there always might be a good deal, even if in Bosnia this didn't work well. But when we come to the negotiations between Kosovo and Serbia before the Kosovo's independence, there was a good cooperation between EU and US. But now the situation has changed, and we still are lacking this transatlantic cooperation between them. I hope that this will change for good. But I'm not that much optimistic, having in mind the EU, let's say the EU reluctance in this sense, but also the US foreign policy stance to have a very fast deal and to have it like as a success story for Trump administration.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Sam Fabrizi.
Well, on Brexit, a double no. No, because the UK is supportive of the accession of the Serbia to the European Union. Paradoxically, it might look like UK is supportive of enlargement. And second one, because the EU never lost the focus on the Western Balkans, and we are the only player globally that is still open for business.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Albert on Italy and Albanian relationship. Has the pandemic given a new momentum to the relationship between Italy and Albania? This was asked by one of our followers. Mike, you have to put microphone on. Can someone from the technical staff help to have the microphone on for Albert?
It's okay? It's okay now, I guess, yeah?
You are.
Well, certainly yes. But as I said from the very beginning, relations between Albania and Italy are very special. And well, we are really grateful what Italy has done for Albania, not simply because Italy is actually home of 500,000 Albanians, but in the last 30 years, Italy has been very close to Albania, supporting the transition of post-communist Albania. And of course, Italy has been, again, great supporter of European integration for Albania and preparing this country for European integration. And I'm really proud that Albania was one of the first countries to send a message, to make a symbolic action by sending nurses and doctors to Italy, a very friendly country for us. We have been lucky having Italy as a neighboring country in the last 30 years, and it's history behind, of course, but I'm not going to comment on details related to the history. So certainly the latest development with COVID-19, they brought more close people and societies. There is a great communications and very friendly relationship between two countries. And of course, we are thankful to, as I said, to our great support of Italy. But if you allow me, I'll make a very short comment on the outsiders in the Balkans, like China, Turkey, Russia. I mean, from the European integration point of view, of course, that I understand that the geopolitical component is important in pushing the European Union enlargement policy towards the Balkans. But at the same time, I think it's important that each country should reform itself in the sense that preparing the country, the state, functionality, other things for European integration. Because we didn't fail, here in Albania at least, we didn't fail to shorten the way to open negotiations because of Russia, because of Turkey or China, but because the current political leadership and the previous one, they failed to work together, as I said, and they are simply applying more or less the same model. We have a kind of Putinization of the Balkans. So, I mean, it's essentially important for our society, but also for European Union to understand that it's important the success of the reforms, because sometimes we have seen that the EU is supporting stability at the expense of democracy. I call it negative stability, which is not a good case. Good way. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert, and thanks to all the panelists. I would like to give, we are over time. We were supposed to finish at 4:15, but I please ask Deputy Minister to have a final comment and final remarks.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you all. Very interesting discussion. I just want to add one element we didn't discuss and maybe could add to further reflections in the future. The fact that, of course, the methodology is good. We noticed that the numbers are good. I understand that, of course, we have to assess the progress, but also shortcomings, although this is done every year. So I would like to say that, obviously, this is a process, and therefore, you know, these kind of elements are analyzed carefully. But one thing I would like to add, to which I really put a lot of attention, is the fact that we should enhance, especially as European Union, the fact that the Western Balkan countries, while they are changing many of their assets and making reforms and other, they have changed their condition from being, for instance, in the field of security, simple beneficiaries, to becoming producers of security, which is something that has changed the panorama completely. I was so happy to meet in Afghanistan, for instance, members of the Albanian army participating in the joint mission. I think that this is something that we should not underestimate, in the sense that when we have put so much effort in trying to integrate, we have also, you know, somehow created the right environment to allow the countries of the Western Balkans, who have gone through so much, and we know that, to become producers of ideas, of dossier, of you know, security itself, and at economic level, and now, for instance, even of solidarity in terms of what they are doing for COVID-19 crisis. So I think that this is something on which we should really meditate more, and I would like to ask you, Paolo, to organize another meeting of this sort to reflect on this particular element. Thank you very much.
It will be a pleasure, as it was a pleasure to have you, Deputy Minister, with us for all the webinar. And I wish to thank all the other panelists. Thank you very much indeed. We would have had other 13 questions for the panel, but this is the time we had planned, and this is the time you can run a webinar without exhausting participants, which are slowly declining right now. We lost some of them. Thank you very much. We will see you soon for the second meeting organized with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.